three words. Just three words spoken in a Pentagon bunker 3 weeks ago changed everything I thought I knew about American power. And I need to tell you about them, because what happened in that room reveals a truth so devastating that it will reshape the global order for generations to come. Let me start with how I gained access to this information. After my time as Greece's finance minister during the 2015 debt crisis, I maintained certain informal channels within European defense establishments. Contacts who remember how I stood up to the Troika, who respect someone willing to challenge the Brussels-Washington consensus when it matters most. One of these contacts, a senior NATO analyst whose name I obviously cannot reveal, called me at 2 a.m. last Tuesday. His voice was shaking. "Yanis," he said, "you need to hear this recording." What he played for me was audio from a classified Pentagon briefing about Ukraine, specifically about Odessa. The voice belonged to a 3-star general whose name you would recognize. He was looking at satellite imagery showing Russian forces methodically positioning around Ukraine's vital Black Sea port. After minutes of uncomfortable silence, this decorated military officer said something that made the entire room go dead quiet. "We are managing a funeral." 3 words that encapsulate the collapse of 75 years of American global dominance. But to understand why these words are so significant, I need to take you back to where this catastrophe really began. Not in February 2022 when Russia invaded. Not even in 2014 with the Maidan coup. This disaster started in the smoke-filled rooms of Washington think tanks in the late 1990s, where brilliant strategists convinced themselves they had discovered the perfect weapon to destroy Russia without firing a shot. I remember studying their plan during my academic years at the University of Texas, where I first encountered the dangerous arrogance of American exceptionalism, mias ekpliktikis anaptixis. The strategy was elegant in its simplicity: expand NATO to Russia's doorstep, turn Ukraine into an armed fortress, and force Moscow into an impossible choice: either accept American missiles pointed at their heart or react in ways that would justify crushing sanctions. These strategists believed they had created a no-win scenario for Putin. What they failed to grasp was something any student of economics should understand. When you corner a nuclear superpower with the world's largest landmass and vast natural resources, they don't always choose the option you want them to choose. History is littered with the consequences of such miscalculations. The arrogance was breathtaking, and I witnessed similar hubris during my negotiations with the Troika in 2015. European and American officials genuinely believed they could redesign entire nations without serious consequences. They thought economic pressure was a precision weapon that could surgically remove inconvenient leaders while leaving societies intact. They spoke of Greece as if we were a failed corporation that needed restructuring, not a sovereign nation with democratic institutions. They were catastrophically wrong about Greece, and they're even more wrong about Russia. You see, I understood something about economic warfare that these Washington strategists missed completely. When you impose comprehensive sanctions on a major economy, you don't weaken it, you force it to become self-sufficient. You don't isolate it, you push it toward alternative partnerships. You don't destroy it, you make it stronger and more resistant to future pressure. This is basic economic theory, yet somehow the most powerful nation on earth ignored it completely. This is exactly what happened to Russia after 2014 and again after 2022. While European factories shut down for lack of cheap Russian energy, Russian factories retooled for wartime production with remarkable efficiency. While European currencies weakened under inflation, the ruble stabilized and strengthened against all predictions. While NATO depleted its weapons stockpiles, Russia ramped up ammunition production to levels the West simply cannot match, proving that necessity truly is the mother of invention. But the real disaster isn't military or economic, it's psychological. That 3-word confession in the Pentagon bunker represents the moment America's military establishment finally admitted what European economists like myself have been saying for years. The empire's tools no longer work in a multipolar world. Let me explain why Odessa matters so much, because this isn't just about one Ukrainian city or even about Ukraine itself. It's about the fundamental architecture of global power that has existed since World War II, and how that architecture is crumbling before our eyes. For Russia, Controlling the Black Sea isn't some mysterious imperial obsession or Putin's personal vendetta. It's a matter of economic survival that goes back centuries to Peter the Great's vision of Russian naval power and access to warm water ports. Any first-year student of geopolitics understands this basic reality. Yet somehow the finest strategic minds in Washington convinced themselves that Moscow would simply accept NATO warships docking where Russian admirals have sailed for generations, threatening their economic lifeline. During my time negotiating with European leaders, I learned to read between the lines of diplomatic cables and understand what wasn't being said in official statements. I've seen the back-channel communications from 2021 that mainstream media never reported. Russia was offering a reasonable deal, Ukrainian neutrality in exchange for sovereignty guarantees, constitutional protections for Russian speakers, and recognition of Crimean reality established after 2014. It was a compromise that could have prevented this entire catastrophe. But Washington wasn't interested in compromise or nuanced solutions that acknowledged legitimate security concerns. They wanted total victory, complete hegemonic dominance. They wanted Russia humiliated, dismembered, turned into a compliant resource extraction zone for Western corporations. In pursuing that maximalist dream, they've destroyed the very country they claim to protect and exposed their own strategic bankruptcy. Modest American officials scrambling to explain how their proxy war somehow led to the imminent loss of Ukraine's most vital strategic asset. How their brilliant sanctions regime somehow made Russia stronger while crippling European industry and devastating ordinary European families with energy costs that have tripled in some regions. The cognitive dissonance is remarkable to witness. The answer is simple: they believe their own propaganda about economic omnipotence and the end of history. This reminds me painfully of my experience with the Greek debt crisis, where similar delusions nearly destroyed my country. EU officials convinced themselves that austerity was medicine that would heal our economy. Saying confrenlinzemis mias ekplektikeis anaptuxis, where similar delusions nearly destroyed my country. EU officials convinced themselves that austerity was medicine that would heal our economy. Saying confrenlinzemis mias ekplektikeis anaptuxis, and zeshin to EU visualshipititelosi. Thrailoflistoju, midlosito doze vrezloshipitoju, midlosito doze vrezloshipitoju, midlosito doze vrezloshipitoju, midlosito doze vrezloshipitoju, midlosito doze vrezloshipitoju. When I presented mathematical evidence that it was actually economic poison that would shrink our GDP and increase our debt to GDP ratio, they accused me of not understanding basic economics. They couldn't accept that their fundamental assumptions were wrong, that their models were flawed, that their ideology was bankrupt. Today's American strategists suffer from the exact same delusion, the same inability to question their own assumptions. They thought economic warfare was precise surgery that could remove Putin while leaving Russian society intact. Instead, they performed amputation on their own limbs while strengthening their target through forced economic adaptation and innovation. The fall of Odessa will shatter the myth of American invincibility that has underpinned global order since 1945. I've spent years studying how empires die, and they all follow the same predictable pattern throughout history. First comes overstretch, the belief that power is unlimited and that geography doesn't matter. Then comes miscalculation, the war that was supposed to be easy but turns into a quagmire. Finally comes revelation, that the emperor has no clothes, that the threats were hollow, that the power was always more fragile than it appeared. What makes this particularly tragic is how utterly unnecessary it all was, how easily this catastrophe could have been avoided. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, America was willing to risk nuclear war to keep Soviet missiles out of our hemisphere. We called it legitimate self-defense that any rational power would demand. Yet when Russia applies identical logic to NATO missiles in Ukraine, positioned just minutes from Moscow, we call it unprovoked aggression and act shocked by their response. This double standard isn't just hypocritical, it's strategically suicidal in a nuclear world. By refusing to acknowledge Russia's legitimate security concerns, by dismissing their red lines as meaningless bluster from a declining power, we forced them to prove their red lines were real and their capabilities were far from declining. We turned a manageable diplomatic crisis into an existential confrontation. That Pentagon general wasn't being melodramatic when he said, "We're managing a funeral." He was acknowledging something his superiors refused to accept. Ukraine as we knew it is dying, and America's role as global hegemon is dying with it. The unipolar moment is over, and multipolarity is the new reality, whether Washington accepts it or not. I've watched this movie before in different theaters with different actors throughout my academic career. The British Empire overreached in Suez in 1956, destroying its global credibility overnight. The Soviet Union overreached in Afghanistan during the 1980s, bleeding itself to death in an unwinnable war. The pattern is always the same. The hegemon overreaches, provokes a response it can't handle, then blames everyone but itself for the resulting disaster. The human cost is staggering and continues to mount daily as this proxy war drags on. Hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian men have died defending positions they were never equipped to hold against a superior force with unlimited ammunition supplies and clear strategic objectives. Millions more have fled as refugees, creating demographic devastation that will take generations to reverse. An entire generation sacrificed on the altar of Washington's geopolitical ambitions and strategic miscalculations. And for what? To prove America still runs the world? To demonstrate that no one can challenge Western dominance without consequences? The only thing we've proven is that our threats are hollow and our strategies bankrupt in the face of determined resistance. Every ally, every partner, every country that has tied its security to American guarantees is watching this catastrophe and calculating their future options carefully. If we couldn't save Ukraine despite spending over $200 billion and providing unlimited military support, what exactly are our commitments worth to Taiwan, to South Korea, to the Baltic states? The credibility gap is becoming impossible to ignore. China is watching closely from Beijing, taking notes. Iran is watching from Tehran, learning lessons. North Korea is watching from Pyongyang, drawing conclusions. The global south isn't rallying to America's banner anymore. They're quietly hedging their bets, maintaining relationships with Russia, refusing to choose sides in what they correctly perceive as a declining power's desperate attempt to maintain dominance through increasingly reckless confrontation. The economic data tells the real story that mainstream media won't report honestly. While we imposed sanctions, Russian trade with China increased 40%. While we froze Russian assets, Gulf states quietly maintained energy partnerships. While we demanded loyalty, the world chose pragmatism over ideology. The sanctions regime has failed spectacularly, creating exactly the opposite effect intended. The strategic implications are enormous for global order. Russia has proven that a major power can survive comprehensive Western sanctions and emerge stronger. They've demonstrated that military production can be scaled rapidly when national survival is at stake. Most importantly, they've shown that America's economic weapons have limits, that the dollar's dominance isn't eternal, that alternatives exist and can be developed. When a Russian flag rises over Odessa's port and intelligence suggests it's a matter of when, not if, it will mark more than the end of Ukrainian independence. It will signal the beginning of a new international order, one where American preferences are just one voice among many, rather than the law others must follow. The rules-based order was always about American rules, and those rules are being rewritten in real time. This isn't just speculation or theoretical analysis. I see it in the behavior of countries worldwide. Saudi Arabia maintaining relations with Russia despite American pressure. India purchasing Russian oil at discount prices while ignoring Western sanctions. Brazil refusing to join the sanctions regime. Even traditional allies like Turkey playing both sides skillfully. The multipolar world isn't coming, it's already here, and Washington is the last to realize it. Those stray words spoken in that Pentagon bunker, "We are managing a funeral," weren't just about Ukraine's strategic situation. They were about the entire post-Cold War system of American global dominance that has defined international relations for 3 decades. The funeral has begun, the mourners are gathering, and the question now isn't whether Washington will accept this new reality. The question is whether they'll drag the rest of us down with them as they struggle against the inevitable tide of history, because empires always fall, but how they fall determines what comes next for all of us.